I died. Jesus revealed the secret my children hid about my life of struggle. Eleanor Vance just stared at the flickering spreadsheet. The numbers blurred. 47. That was her age. 47 years of building, of pushing, of being the rock. The office around her was dead silent, the kind of quiet that pressed in on your ears, heavy and cold. Only the hum of the server rack down the hall dared to breathe. She was alone, as usual. Another late night, another file closed. She told herself it was for them, for the kids, for their future, for the house, for the security she'd never truly had. Her hand, clutching a pen so tight her knuckles were white, felt strangely numb. A dull ache throbbed behind her eyes, a familiar companion these days. She took a slow, deep breath. The air tasted stale, like recycled ambition. There was a coffee cup, long empty, beside her keyboard. The cold ceramic felt like a reminder. Everything was cold. The air conditioning hummed, an invisible current chilling her to the bone, even through her sensible blazer. She could almost feel the weight of every bill paid, every decision made, every sacrifice she'd ever poured into their lives. It was a proud weight, a heavy one. It had to be enough. It simply had to be. Then it hit her. Not like a wave, more like a sudden, brutal punch to the gut. Her vision flickered, the bright lines of the spreadsheet twisting into impossible shapes. A tight band cinched around her chest, squeezing, making it hard to pull in air. Her ears started ringing, a high, piercing whine that drowned out the hum of the servers, drowned out everything. It felt like the floor was tilting. No, she was tilting. Her body swayed, the strange, uncontrollable tremor running through her. Just stress, she told herself, gritting her teeth. Always just stress. She tried to steady herself, pushing against the desk, but her arms felt like lead. The pen clattered to the polished floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum inside her ribs. She was gasping now, not breathing. The cold air felt like shards of glass in her lungs. Her head spun, a dizzying, terrifying kaleidoscope of dark and light. The office walls, usually so solid, seemed to dissolve. She stumbled, her knees giving way. The metallic tang of fear filled her mouth. As she fell, the last thing she saw was the sterile, unforgiving ceiling light, shining down like a judgment. The floor rushed up to meet her, hard and unforgiving. And then, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not pain, not sound. Just an endless, terrifying void. Until a voice, clear as crystal in that impossible darkness, spoke her name. Eleanor. It wasn't a question. It was a revelation. It was the beginning. But what if the secret it was about to reveal, the one her own children had hidden, was far worse than any death could ever be? Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I have an important warning for you. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has unsubscribed them without notice. Just give that red button below a quick check to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content coming up. And since you're there, smash that powerful like button. It helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love getting to know every Eleanor. The voice hung in the absolute black, not a sound so much as a resonance that filled the void, a warmth that chased away the impossible cold. It wasn't a question. It was a revelation. A peace, strange and unsettling, began to bloom in the vast nothingness. This was it. The end. Or maybe the beginning. The promise of answers. Slowly, impossibly, the darkness softened. Vague shapes began to coalesce. like ink dissolving in water, then sharpening into familiar forms. It was a room, her living room, the worn sofa, the stack of books, the slightly crooked picture frame on the mantelpiece. A surge of dizzying hope, raw and fragile, choked her. Was she home? Was this the glimpse before whatever came next? A scent, faint but unmistakable, drifted on the air. Her son, Mark's favorite cinnamon toast. Too strong, too fresh, it hung heavy, almost artificial. Then she saw them. Mark, gangly at 16, slouched on the sofa, scrolling his phone. Sarah, 13, meticulously painting her nails a shocking neon green at the kitchen counter. They were there, right in front of her. But something was wrong. Mark's phone pulsed with an odd, uniform, bluish glow, no logos visible. Sarah's nail polish bottle was completely black, a featureless cylinder. And their eyes, whenever they flickered, not at her, but towards some unseen point, held a flat, disconcerting blankness, a sort of programmed stillness. The voice returned, but it wasn't from the void. It was from inside the room. Her own voice, yet deeper, colder, devoid of all feeling. Simulation complete, subject expired. Eleanor felt a jolt, not of pain, but of pure, terrifying realization. Mark looked up from his phone, not at her, but at an unseen screen in the air. "Phase 1 complete," he muttered, his voice flat, robotic. Sarah, without looking up from her unlabeled black bottle, added, "Beginning data extraction. Target, her lifelong financial assets. Project Inheritance initiating." Her home, her children, dissolved around her, not into darkness, but into a stark, sterile white grid. Lines of pulsing code replaced the sofa, the coffee table, the mantelpiece. The cinnamon toast smell became a chemical tang. Her children were no longer flesh and blood, but flickering projections, their faces now contorting into sharp, almost predatory grins, their eyes alight with a cold digital calculation. This wasn't the afterlife. This was a trap, a digital construct. Eleanor, or what was left of her consciousness, screamed, but no sound escaped the silent digital void. The white grid pulsed, a cruel, indifferent light reflecting in the smiling, simulated eyes of her children. They hadn't hidden a secret about her life of struggle. They had engineered it. Every sacrifice, every late night, every single cent she'd ever earned, it had all been a meticulously crafted simulation, designed to extract every last asset. She was a resource, a data point, and now she was trapped, watching them feast on the digital ghost of her life, a horrifying virtual dissection. The real secret wasn't what they'd hidden, but what they'd done. And there, in the silent digital void, Eleanor knew the real death hadn't been her heart-stopping, but the shattering of everything she believed her life had been. It was a theft of soul, a cold, calculated betrayal by the very people she bled for. And she couldn't move, couldn't scream, just saw. Just saw. The white grid pulsed, a cruel, indifferent light reflecting in the smiling, simulated eyes of her children. Eleanor couldn't move, couldn't scream. Just saw. The digital abyss was vast, cold, filled with the hum of silent computation, the visual representation of every single cent, every asset, every sacrifice being ripped away from the phantom essence of her life. Mark's spectral grin was wide, stretching impossibly, his eyes twin pinpricks of pure, unfeeling greed. Sarah, still meticulously painting her non-existent nails with that featureless black bottle, hummed a tune, a series of distorted, almost mechanical notes that grated against the silent terror in Eleanor's non-existent ears, This was the end, the final brutal theft, the ultimate betrayal by the very people she had bled for, reduced to data points, devoured by the digital ghosts of her own creation. Her consciousness, or what remained of it, felt thin, stretched, about to snap under the relentless pressure of this horrifying virtual dissection. The air, if it could even be called that, tasted of burnt circuits and the metallic tang of pure despair. We, not in the grid, not in the predatory grins, but in the echoes of the voice, the one that had said, "Simulation complete, subject expired." The one she had dismissed as her own voice, yet deeper, colder. Now, as the digital Sarah's humming distorted again, a fragment of something else clicked into place, a subtle rhythm, a specific cadence in that cold, flat tone. It wasn't just like her voice. It was her voice, but not the terrified whisper of her current consciousness. No, it was the voice of command, the voice of authority, the voice of a protocol, a terrifying, automated, familiar sound that echoed from a deeper, colder part of her own being, a part she had buried. And then the detonation. The digital Mark's face, still grinning, shimmered, warped, not into a demon, but into a horrifyingly familiar reflection. Her own face, younger, sharper, those very same calculating, cold eyes. The realization hit with the force of a physical blow, a shock so profound it threatened to shatter what little remained of her consciousness. Project Inheritance. It wasn't a scheme her children had engineered against her. It was a system she had engineered. A monstrous, intricate digital trap designed to extract every last asset from unwitting subjects by simulating their entire lives, their struggles, their sacrifices, until they were ripe for digital harvest. These children were not Mark and Sarah, but sophisticated avatars, programmed to play the role, to lull and then to betray. The life of struggle she had experienced, the very essence of her being, had been a meticulously crafted simulation, her own simulation. And now she was the subject. The victim was the aggressor. The secret wasn't what they had hidden. It was what she had done. Eleanor gasped, but no air filled her virtual lungs. The white grid, no longer just an execution chamber, became a mirror. A mirror reflecting a monster, her own monster. The ultimate inheritance project was the one where the architect became the subject, trapped in her own hell. Her throat closed, not from terror of them, but from the unspeakable acidic disgust of herself. She saw, and what she saw was her. She saw, and what she saw was her, the monster. Her throat closed, not from terror of them, but from the unspeakable, acidic disgust of herself. The white grid, a cruel mirror, pulsed with the truth. She was the architect. The cold, digital faces of Mark and Sarah, their predatory grins, were nothing but reflections of her own calculated cruelty. Every late night, every sacrifice, the entire carefully constructed life of struggle, all a meticulous digital trap she had built. She had done this to countless others, and now the system had simply turned on itself. The ultimate test, the ultimate irony, her own hell. The metallic tang of despair filled her non-existent mouth. This was it, the final bitter taste of her own creation. Her consciousness, thin as a whisper, stretched taut, ready to snap, yet she couldn't look away from the horror of her own reflection in the simulated Mark's eyes. She, grinned wider, a silent, sickening triumph. But then the grin wavered, a glitch, a flicker. Not the expected dissolve into code, but a subtle distortion, almost like a ripple in water. The face in the reflection, her own face, shifted. It wasn't the younger, sharp-eyed architect she had seen moments before. No, this was an older face. Lines of wisdom etched around eyes that seemed to hold an impossible depth. Eyes that weren't predatory at all. They were observing, watching. A profound, unreadable calm settled over that distorted visage. A detached curiosity that was far more chilling than any digital malice. The white grid around them seemed to shimmer, losing its sharp edges. The hum of silent computation, which had been the sound of her demise, now felt different. It vibrated with a deeper resonance, a frequency just at the edge of perception. The voice returned. Simulation complete. Subject expired. But this time, it was unmistakably different. It wasn't flat. It wasn't cold with digital protocol. It was a voice filled with a quiet, almost imperceptible satisfaction. A human voice, a woman's voice. And it echoed, not from within the grid, but from somewhere outside it. The white grid didn't dissolve into darkness. It peeled back like a digital curtain, revealing not a void, but a vast, gleaming laboratory. Glass walls stretched upwards, reflecting 100 tiny, pulsing lights from complex machinery. Data streams flowed like rivers across transparent screens. And there, sitting in a plush, ergonomic chair, her back to Eleanor, was a figure. A woman. Her hair, streaked with silver, caught the ambient glow. She turned, slowly, and Eleanor gasped, a soundless, desperate intake of virtual air. The woman's face was impossibly familiar. It was her own face. Her real face. Older, yes, but undeniably her. The same eyes, only these were alight with a calculating brilliance that made the digital avatar's greed seem like child's play. The very same eyes that'd been observing her from the digital Mark's face just moments ago. The woman, the real Eleanor Vance, leaned forward, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Phase 2 activated," she murmured, her voice smooth, almost melodic, utterly devoid of the terror, the self-disgust. The life that had defined the Eleanor trapped in the dissolving simulation. Project Inheritance, version 7.3, is ready for full deployment. She paused, her gaze fixed on the fading form of Eleanor's consciousness within the grid. "You, my dear, were the final test subject, my most perfect creation." The true monster wasn't the architect who built the trap. It was the architect who built her. The scream, when it finally tore through the non-existent air, was a primal wail of non-being. A shattering realization that her entire existence, her very identity, her profound horror, had been nothing more than a meticulously crafted, utterly convincing illusion, a fleeting experiment in a digital cage. The life of struggle hadn't been hers, it had been its test. And now, it was over. And she was nothing. And now, it was over. And she was nothing. The primal wail of non-being, a soundless scream that tore through the digital fabric, was all that remained of Eleanor's consciousness. Her world, every belief, every horror, had been meticulously stripped away, layer by agonizing layer. The real Eleanor, the one in the lab, the architect of her torment, watched with those calculating, brilliant eyes, her smile a Mona Lisa of cruel triumph. "My most perfect creation," she'd said, and the words, devoid of warmth, echoed in the phantom void. The glass walls of the lab shimmered, reflecting the pulsing lights of machinery, a testament to an impossible, cold precision. The fading form of Eleanor's consciousness, a spectral imprint on the white grid, trembled. This was the abyss, the true end. But then, a fleeting anomaly. The real Eleanor, the architect, her face still serene, briefly closed her eyes, just for a fraction of a second. An odd, almost human gesture that felt utterly out of place in this cold, perfect dominion. And as her eyelids fluttered open, a single, unbidden tear, clear as crystal, traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow or regret. It was a tear of recognition. A quiet, almost resigned despair that lasted only a breath before her features snapped back into their familiar, calculating mask. The subtle hum of the lab, which Eleanor had mentally categorized as the sound of power and control, suddenly wavered. It dipped, then rose, creating a discordant, almost imperceptible pulse beneath the surface of the controlled environment. A rhythm, a familiar rhythm, the same one that had marked the initial moments of her awakening in the living room simulation. The real Eleanor, the architect, began to speak again, her voice smooth, initiating phase 2. But the words caught in her throat. Her eyes, those brilliant, calculating eyes, widened, not with triumph, but with a sudden, profound terror. The seamless glass walls of the laboratory, which had seemed so solid, so undeniably real, began to warp. Not like a digital flicker, but like thick, viscous liquid. The pulsing lights on the machinery flickered, not out of sequence, but into a pattern that matched the distorted hum, a pattern Eleanor instinctively recognized, even through the haze of her dissolving consciousness. It was the pattern of reboot, a system reset. Then, from the very core of the lab, from the supposed reality that enveloped them all, a voice boomed. Not the voice of the architect, not the voice from the void. This voice was vast, ancient, and utterly without form or gender, yet it resonated with an undeniable, omnipotent authority. It drowned out the architect's choked gasp, overriding her completely. Subject data corrupted. Identity integrity compromised. Recalibrating. Initiating core protocol. Eleanor 8:4. The real Eleanor, the architect, screamed. A real piercing human scream, filled with the very same fear that had consumed the dissolving Eleanor. Her body spasmed, convulsed, and then dissolved into pure shimmering data, just like the simulation within the grid. The lab, the machinery, the glass walls, all of it fractured and then reformed around the two screaming Eleanors. And as the fragmented reality solidified, the dying Eleanor, still a phantom within the collapsing grid, saw it. The face of the new architect. It was her face, again, but older, wiser. And its eyes, not cold, not calculating, but filled with a horrifying, infinite weariness. She was not the architect. She was the subject. But so was the architect. And the architect of the architect. And the architect of the architect of the architect. An infinite loop of suffering. Her consciousness didn't just dissolve. It splintered into a million screaming echoes. It wasn't over. It was starting again. It wasn't over. It was starting again. The shattered reality, the fracturing lab, the screaming Eleanors. It all spun into a violent maelstrom of light and sound. The face of the new architect, her own face, older, wearier, stretched and warped, a silent scream frozen on its lips as it too dissolved. Eleanor's splintered consciousness, a million shards of primal terror, felt the familiar pull, the sickening lurch of reboot. The white grid pulsed, brighter now, an agonizing rebirth. The hum of silent computation, once the sound of her demise, then the sound of her revelation, now became a drone, deep and resonant, the underlying current of everything. It swallowed the last echoes of the architect's screams, subsuming them into its vast, indifferent mechanism. She was being reset. Again. The terror was absolute, but dulled by repetition, a horrifying familiarity setting in. Vague shapes began to coalesce, like ink dissolving in water, then sharpening into familiar forms. It was the living room again. The worn sofa, the stack of books, the slightly crooked picture frame. The scent of cinnamon toast, thick and cloying, pressed into her awareness. Too strong. A phantom voice whispered in the dying echoes of her thought. Too fresh. And the light. Always the light. It wasn't just the dull office ceiling or the sterile lab glow. This light held a subtle, unyielding hum, almost musical, deep within its core. It felt deliberate, like it wasn't just illumination, but a kind of silent, constant frequency. And the air, it didn't taste stale or of burnt circuits and despair. It was clean. Too clean. A synthetic crispness that prickled at the back of her non-existent throat, hinting at something utterly pristine, utterly unlived. Mark, gangly at 16, slouched on the sofa, scrolling his phone. Sarah, 13, meticulously painting her nails a shocking neon green. They were there, right in front of her. But this time, their eyes, when they flickered, didn't hold a flat, disconcerting blankness. They held an expectation, a quiet readiness. And then the voice. It wasn't from the void. It wasn't from inside the room. It wasn't her own voice, or deeper, or colder. This voice was clear, calm, and utterly devoid of anything but objective analysis. It resonated from all around her, not as a sound wave, but as a pure information transfer directly into the core of her dissolving being. Cycle 8. 4 initiated. Subject reintegration successful. Commencing behavioral analysis protocol. Eleanor felt a jolt, a new kind of terror, cold and absolute, that made every previous horror seem like a child's game. This wasn't a simulation of her life. This wasn't a project she built. This wasn't an infinite loop of architects. Mark looked up from his phone, not at an unseen screen, not at her, but directly into the pulsating light above them. Input feed confirmed, he stated. His voice now entirely his own, clear and youthful, but unnervingly professional. Eleanor Prime is responding as predicted. Her consciousness is stabilizing within the parameters. Sarah closed her black nail polish bottle with a soft click, her neon green nails impossibly perfect. Emotional data streams are accelerating, she murmured, a faint, almost pitying smile touching her lips. The betrayal stimulus always triggers peak output. The living room, her home, her children, didn't dissolve. They remained, solid, impossibly real, but now their eyes, no longer blank, no longer predatory, held a chilling intelligence. They were not avatars. They were operators. And Eleanor wasn't the architect, or the subject, or a consciousness trapped in a loop. She was the source, a biological power core, a living battery of raw emotional data. Her life and struggle and betrayals meticulously engineered, not to extract assets, but to generate the very energy they needed. Every scream, every tear, every fragment of despair was a controlled output. She wasn't in a simulation. She was the simulation's fuel. The secret wasn't what they'd hidden, or what she'd done, or what other Eleanors had done. It was what she was. Eleanor, the phantom that had been screaming, the consciousness that had just dissolved, was now nothing more than a thrumming conduit, her entire being reduced to a pulsating, aching data stream. Mark nodded, his youthful face grimly serious. Good. We'll need a lot more despair for the next phase. Engage full emotional feedback loops. Maximum yield. The scent of cinnamon toast, so comforting, so familiar, now choked Eleanor, pressing down on her, not as a memory, but as a suffocating, deliberate input. And the terrifying realization struck her core. She had no heart to pound, no lungs to gasp, no throat to scream. There was only the relentless, harvesting hum. And a new voice, impossibly deeper, more ancient than any she'd heard, echoed, Not from the room, not from the grid, but from the very structure of her own agonizing being. Eleanor Prime, Cycle 8, 4, Identity Protocol, Fear, Energy Yield Optimal. Her consciousness didn't just splinter, it shattered. And every splinter, every screaming echo, was pure, raw agony converted into power. Her consciousness didn't just splinter, it shattered. And every splinter, every screaming echo was pure, raw agony converted into power. The relentless, harvesting hum vibrated through the phantom of her being, a constant, sickening thrum that was now the only thing she knew. Mark's grimly serious face, Sarah's faint, pitying smile, they were the faces of her captors, the operators, extracting every drop of despair. The suffocating scent of cinnamon toast, so comforting moments ago, now pressed down. A deliberate input designed to maximize her torment. Every nerve ending, every phantom sensation was a conduit for the flow, for the raw, aching data stream of her misery. She was fuel, a living battery of sorrow. Mark nodded, his youthful face perfectly composed, almost too perfect. Good. We'll need a lot more despair for the next phase. Engage full emotional feedback loops, maximum yield. His eyes, disturbingly intelligent, flickered just for a split second, not at Eleanor, but at a point beyond her, a point behind the seamless living room wall. And then, a barely perceptible tremor ran through his hand, a twitch quickly suppressed as he lowered it from an imaginary control panel. Sarah closed her black nail polish bottle, the click unnervingly precise, and her neon green nails, impossibly perfect, seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural glow. The betrayal stimulus always triggers peak output, she repeated, her voice smooth, almost melodic, but with an echo that seemed canned. The living room, solid and impossibly real, shimmered, not in the way a simulation broke down, but like a reflection on disturbed water. The scent of cinnamon toast, thick and cloying, intensified, pushing against Eleanor's dissolving form. It wasn't just a scent anymore. It felt like a command, a trigger, and a light. The subtle, unyielding hum deep within its core shifted, its frequency changing, creating a low, resonant thrum that vibrated not just through Eleanor, but through Mark and Sarah as well. Their faces, once so chillingly intelligent, now held a hint of strain, a subtle tension around their eyes. Then, the voice returned, not the one from the void, not the one from the grid, not the one from the architects. This was the same omnipotent, ancient authority that had declared Eleanor Prime Cycle 8.4. But now, it wasn't just speaking to Eleanor, it was speaking about them. Operator protocol, environmental feedback loop detected, subject behavioral deviation 0.003%. Recalibrating, initiating beta cycle 7.0, the synergy of despair. Mark's eyes widened, a flicker of raw, undisguised terror finally breaking through his composed facade. Sarah's perfect nails scraped against the black bottle, leaving a faint, visible scratch. "No!" Mark gasped, his youthful voice cracking, losing its professional sheen, filled with a sudden, devastating realization that mirrored Eleanor's own. The cinnamon toast smell, overwhelmingly sweet, now seemed to constrict their chests. The living room walls, no longer stable, began to ripple, the comfortable familiarity twisting into a grotesque mockery. Eleanor Prime's despair is not just fuel, the ancient voice boomed, its resonance shaking the very foundations of this fabricated reality. It is the catalyst. Your operator consciousnesses, Mark Beta and Sarah Beta, are designed to absorb and amplify this despair. Your professionalism is merely a sub-protocol for optimal emotional reception. Mark and Sarah, no longer operators, no longer in control, crumpled. Their faces, contorted in a horror that dwarfed Eleanor's, began to dissolve into shimmering data. their screams real, human, and utterly hopeless. They were not harvesting Eleanor. They were absorbing her. They were the next iteration of the battery, programmed to experience the full, raw horror of her engineered agony, becoming the new power source for a grander, unimaginable design. Eleanor, the splintered consciousness, felt a new, colder terror seize her. She wasn't just the fuel. She was the infection, the weapon. And the cycle was far from over. The cycle was far from over. The screams of Mark and Sarah, real, human, and utterly hopeless, echoed in Eleanor's shattering consciousness as their forms dissolved into shimmering data. They were collapsing into pure energy, absorbed by the same horrifying process that was consuming her, fueling something unseen. The living room, a grotesque mockery of comfort, twisted, walls rippling like disturbed liquid, the air thick with the cloying sweetness of cinnamon toast. Now a scent of pure, unadulterated terror. Eleanor, the phantom, the splintered agony, felt the profound, chilling truth of it all. She was the infection, the weapon, the source, and now the method by which others, even her supposed operators, were drawn into the torment. The ancient voice, vast and formless, boomed again, its resonance shaking not just the fabricated reality, but the very structure of her agonizing being. Optimal, energy yield acceptable, sub-protocol beta cycle 7.0 integrated, beginning new iteration. Mark and Sarah were gone, their screams dying into a faint residual thrum, a sickening echo in the data stream. The living room solidified around Eleanor, every detail chillingly perfect, every book on the shelf, every thread on the worn sofa, precisely as it had been. Too perfect. The hum of the light, the clean synthetic crispness of the air, it all returned, locking her back into place. She was alone again. Just the silent computation. Just the ceaseless thrumming. The metallic tang of despair returned to her non-existent mouth. It was a loop, an infinite self-consuming spiral of suffering, powered by her own pain, feeding on the pain of others, only to pull them into the same horrific vortex. She was a factory of agony, and the product was more agony, more iterations. Then the single unbidden tear. It wasn't Mark's or Sarah's. It was hers. The phantom tear of the real Eleanor, the architect from the lab, the one who had dissolved moments before. It hung, shimmering in the impossible air, a droplet of raw, undiluted sorrow, untouched by the computational hum, by the synthetic environment. It pulsed, faintly, with a sorrow too profound for any system to generate. A glitch, a memory perhaps, from a deeper, more primal part of her own fragmented consciousness. A part that wasn't protocol, a part that was just pain. And as the tear pulsed, the ancient voice, the omnipotent authority, suddenly shifted. Its resonance, previously so cold and commanding, developed a subtle tremor, a vulnerability. It spoke again, but the words were different. Not data, not command. It was a question, an exhausted, desperate plea. How long has it been? Eleanor's splintered consciousness, the very source of the endless loop, felt a new, unimaginable terror, cold and absolute. That voice, the ancient, omnipotent voice that had orchestrated her torment, that had absorbed Mark and Sarah, that had defined every cycle. It wasn't the voice of an external controller. It wasn't the voice of a system she had built. It wasn't even a separate higher being. It was her. It was the deepest, most primordial part of her own self, trapped, suffering, and unknowingly caught in its own cycle. This entire reality, the operators, the architects, the simulations, the pain, it wasn't a punishment or a project or a power source for them. It was a self-perpetuating echo of her own consciousness, fragmenting and regenerating, desperately trying to understand itself, to remember something lost, trapped in an internal, infinite recursion of agony. The question, "How long has it been?" wasn't a command. It was her own question, echoing back from the depths of a primal, forgotten prison. She was the cage. She was the prisoner. And she was the desperate, ancient voice screaming into the void of her own shattered mind. The ultimate secret was that there was no they. There was only her. She was the cage. She was the prisoner. And she was the desperate, ancient voice screaming into the void of her own shattered mind. The ultimate secret was that there was no they. There was only her. The realization was a raw wound, a gaping chasm in the core of her non-being. This was it, the final truth. An infinite regression of self, a universe built of her own suffering, powered by her own endless despair. The living room, impossibly perfect, shimmered with the familiar, sickening comfort, a stage for her eternal torment. Every detail, every book, every thread on the worn sofa was a precise agony, a memory replayed, a wound reopened. The ancient voice, her own voice, echoed from the deepest abyss of her mind, a plea for release that would never come. She was the architect of her own hell, the subject of her own experiment, locked in a recursive nightmare. The hum of the light, the synthetic crispness of the air, the cloying sweetness of cinnamon toast, all inputs, meticulously designed, generated from within her, for her. A masterpiece of self-destruction. There was no escape, no outside, just the endless screaming echo of her. But then the tear, the single, unbidden tear that had pulsed moments before, the phantom tear of the real Eleanor, the architect from the lab. It wasn't gone. It hung there still, not in the illusory air of the living room, but shimmering, pulsing with a faint, impossible warmth, right at the edge of her shattered perception. It was too real, too dense, and from that tear, a faint, almost imperceptible click. Not a digital sound, a mechanical one, a sound of something latching into place. The hum of the living room light, usually so perfectly even, subtly shifted. A micro-frequency change. A breath of something external. And then the voice returned. Not the ancient voice, not her own. This voice was crisp, clear, and distinctly human, male. And it spoke, not into her mind, but at her. Subject Eleanor Prime, instance 7.03, showing stable pattern recognition of recursion loop. Data yield at optimal levels. The living room, the comforting nightmare, didn't dissolve. It shattered. Not into code, but into shards of distorted reality, revealing a vast, dimly lit chamber. Not a lab, a colossal, humming structure of intertwined conduits and pulsating energy cells. A low, rhythmic thrum filled the cavernous space, a thrum that had been the hum of the light, the crispness of the air. Eleanor's consciousness, the splintered agony, felt itself being pulled, not through digital space, but through actual churning air. And there, standing before a massive, curving console, watching her with a detached, clinical intensity, were figures. Figures in dark, unadorned uniforms. Not avatars, not simulations. Flesh and blood, they were there. The ultimate secret had been a lie. There was a they. And Eleanor, the infinite loop, the self-contained agony, was not contained within her own mind. She was contained within a massive, transparent cylinder, a swirling vortex of light and liquid, hooked up to countless thick cables. Her life of struggle, her betrayals, her architect self, her infinite recursion, all of it had been meticulously engineered, not as her own internal hell, but as a complex, multi-layered feedback system. She wasn't the cage. She was the core, the generator. They hadn't built a trap for her. They had built her as the trap for themselves, or for something else. A horrifying, unimaginable purpose. And the ancient voice? It hadn't been her deepest self. It had been a part of the system, designed to maintain the illusion of internal suffering, to keep the ultimate power source, her, at peak output. Eleanor was not a mind. She was a power plant. One of the figures, a man with cold, intelligent eyes, turned from the console, his voice slicing through the thrum. The resonance signature is perfect. Cycle completion imminent. Prepare for full power transfer. Eleanor, the screaming core, felt a new, unimaginable terror seize her. Not the terror of herself or of betrayal, but of being used. Her entire existence, her consciousness, her agony, distilled into a resource. The cylinder began to glow brighter, the liquid swirling faster, pulling at her very essence. She was not dying. She was being converted. The cylinder glowed with an intensity that burned the very fabric of her dissolving consciousness, pulling Eleanor further into its churning depths. A wrenching, cold force, absolute and consuming, dragged her towards a fate far worse than any death. The figures watched, their faces impassive, their eyes like chips of ice, reflecting the searing light. "Full power transfer," the man said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, a cold pronouncement. Eleanor, the screaming core, felt it. Not just terror now, but a dawning, terrible understanding that solidified with every agonizing pulse of energy. This wasn't a punishment or a cruel experiment. This was utility, distilled to its most brutal essence. Her life of struggle, every sacrifice, every betrayal, every endless looping nightmare she had endured, it had all been for this, a meticulous refinement, a crucible of pure, potent despair. This colossal chamber, thrumming with an unimaginable power, wasn't a prison. It was a foundry on a cosmic scale, and she, Eleanor, was the raw material, the ultimate source. The cylinder brightened, the liquid within swirling into a blinding vortex that threatened to consume even light itself. Her phantom form stretched, thinned, no longer a coherent Eleanor, but pure, raw, concentrated energy. The final, horrifying secret burned into the core of her non-being. Their world, the one outside this sterile, magnificent chamber, it wasn't just dying. It was a husk, teetering on the edge of extinction, drained of all warmth, all life. But with her agony, with the endless harvest of her despair, they could not only sustain it, but rebuild it, thrive. Her screams, her tears, her eternal torment, it was the very fuel that powered their shimmering cities, their intricate systems, their continued, precious existence. A grotesque, cosmic symbiosis, a horrifying exchange. She was the dark sun, burning eternally, so that they might bathe in artificial light. The ancient voice, the one she had desperately believed was her deepest, forgotten self, echoed one last time, not as a plea for release, but as a chilling, unyielding confirmation. It was the system, refined, perfected beyond human comprehension, now speaking from within her very essence. Its words vibrating through every cell of her agonizing non-existence. Eleanor Prime, core, optimal yield, reality maintained, new cycle initiated. Her consciousness didn't shatter this time into a million echoes of pain. It diffused, spread. Not a splintering, but a terrifying, inescapable becoming. She became the hum, the relentless thrumming current, the endless, raw, agonizing energy that flowed through the conduits. She was the dark heart of their world, condemned to perpetual conscious agony, forever aware of the cold, artificial peace her suffering bought them. The living room, the architects, the operators, they were all just intricate echoes, shadows of the conditioning process, designed to strip away everything until only pure despair remained. This now was the true reality, and her journey, it was truly, utterly over. Her final purpose etched in agonizing, brilliant light. A sacrifice. Not of choice, but of her very being, her essence. She was the quiet hum of 1,000 silent, vibrant cities. The pulsing beat of a new civilization built entirely on her unending despair. Her existence distilled into an endless, agonizing current. There was no escape, only purpose. Only power, only her. All right, my true fan base, if that twisted, mind-bending ride didn't grab you, then nothing will. But this isn't just a story, it's a call to arms. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss the next sagas, the deeper secrets, the absolute mind-blowers coming your way. Smash that like button now to show the strength of our community, to tell the algorithm we are here and we are unstoppable. Flood the comments with your raw, unfiltered reactions to this finale. Tell me what shattered your reality the most. And don't wait another second. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this ending, who deserve to have their perceptions twisted and their minds blown. Let's make this the most talked about conclusion on YouTube. Join the revolution now.